Alright guys, it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's get to this next question. Hi Jason, my mom who is 65 has retired and wants to start training using weights with my help. Do you have any advice in general? Her joints are relatively good. She is prone to LBP and pain in her right hip. Alright, if she is 65, she most likely has some mobility issues, so the first things that I would focus on, rather than put her on weights at all in the first month, I would go ahead and have her start doing mobility exercises, foam rolling, third world squats, even squatting down to a box, and just body weight stuff in general. And what I would also do, because she's got some issues with the one hip, I would go ahead and have her start using light bands, maybe start with a purple band or a red band even, and have her, again, just wrap them around her knees and spread those apart, almost like the good girl, bad girl machine you see people doing all the time. So basically the bad girl machine, as people call it, do that with a band so that you can start strengthening that hip and work on all of her mobility before you put her on weights, and then have her start adding in body weight exercises or even assisted body weight exercises. She might not be strong enough to do a chin up or a pull up, but she could do them with bands tied onto a rack. Again, body weight squats, even starting with squats holding onto the back of a chair, squatting to a box to get that mobility down. Things like that are what she needs to do before you put her on any free weights. That's where I would start. Let's get everything strong, get everything mobile, get her to where she can do crunches, planks, get her core strong to protect her back, and then gradually and slowly start incorporating free weight exercises. Again, after everything else is where you want it. That hip is strengthened, mobility is good, her core is strong. That's what I would do for at least a month, and then slowly start adding body weight exercises and again, free weights as she is able to do them safely, and you can assess that all that other stuff is ready to go. All right, next question. Hi Jason, I hope this doesn't sound like a trick question. In one of your videos, you quoted a study where participants put on substantial amounts of muscle without training when administered AAS. However, in an earlier video about Boston, you said he's small because he trains like an idiot. Which do you believe to be true? Thanks. No, that's not a trick question at all. I think it's just a misunderstanding on my point, and that's okay. Let's go ahead and clarify that so that that misunderstanding can disappear. Yeah, they put on substantial amounts of muscle. Boston isn't small. Boston is massive. I hope no one thinks that Boston is actually small. Boston is small for the amount of gear he takes because his training is probably adding almost nothing to his size, meaning the way he trains it with such light weights, terrible range of motion, terrible form, all of that is actually probably not contributing significantly, if at all, to the amount of muscle mass he has, meaning he could probably be the same size he's at if he just came in and trained for 10 minutes once a week. Again, his training stimulation is so minimal and weak for his relative size, because again, the weights he uses with partial ranges of motion for minimal volume isn't contributing at all. His size is probably somewhere between 95% to maybe even 100% attributable to the drugs he's on and nothing else. He would probably be bigger if he trained harder and with heavier workloads and heavier weights. He would probably be actually bigger than he is now, almost certainly. So what I'm saying there is that his size is purely due to the drugs. His training probably isn't contributing significantly, might be contributing to 1 or 2 pounds of muscle that he has, if that. It's not a significant factor overall. So I hope you don't think that I'm saying he's small. Boston is big. Boston is bigger than 99% of the fitness YouTubers, actually. He's enormous. But if he actually trained with any amount of workload with the drugs he's on, he would be even bigger than he is. He is purely a product of drugs, is what I'm saying, not his actual training philosophies or what he does in the gym. All right, next question. I want to try some program like your novice 5x5, but I train in martial arts once a week and feel sore the day after from the explosive leg and core work done in the session. So it is hard to follow a full body workout 3 times a week. Do you have any suggestions? Also, how would you enhance maximally your martial arts performance if you were in my case and have little muscle and strength? Thanks. All right, here's the problem of what you're running into. Remember, my novice 5x5 is a maximum hypertrophy with a strength oriented aspect to it program. That's what it is. It's a maximum hypertrophy program. It doesn't leave room for you to have other real training other than some cardio and GPP work, a minimal amount, mainly being able to do some list cardio and things. You don't have recovery left to do other things on that program. It is not appropriate for athletes. It's not appropriate for someone who has other training goals and endeavors besides getting as big as possible in their first year of training. So accordingly, you're going to need to run another program. There are simply other programs you could use, or you could cut down to the cutting version of it because it cuts the workload by 1/3 on the cutting version of the Novice 5x5. That would allow you a lot more recovery room to do other things that you want to do. Your other options would be to run a more explosive oriented program. My Novice 5x5 isn't really explosive training. 5 sets of 5 with sets across isn't going to allow you to train to be explosive. So that's actually kind of a misnomer there. That is like hypertrophy level volume at that point. 25 total reps with around 80% of your max is not explosive training. Now for you as a martial artist, no, I wouldn't run the novice program at all. I would look closely at what I put out a while back. If you guys remember, I made a long video about the top 5 exercises for power, strength, size, explosiveness, all of that. If you guys recall, go back and watch that video. I would, as a martial artist, I would run a program based upon beltless deadlifts, front squats, push presses, maybe power cleans, weighted chin-ups, weighted dips, things like that. That is what I would recommend that you do. Weighted body weight exercises and explosive full body movements. That's how you need to train for martial arts. And can you still get big doing that? Yes. Are you going to get quite as big as fast as you would on the novice program? No, you might only get 80 to 90% of the results you would get in terms of size, but you're going to be a lot more explosive. You're going to be stronger. You're going to have better carryover to your martial arts. So if your martial arts is important to you, then your weight training needs to reflect that. You need to go to explosive full body style training movements that actually are in the explosive range in terms of the weight, the workload, everything else. You need to be doing triples, not 5 sets of 5. You need to focus on, again, exercises that are going to be more explosive: push presses, beltless deadlifts, front squats, all that stuff, power cleans. And again, body weight exercises in general are always going to carry over really, really well to martial arts. If you're going to do volume, maybe doing your volume with body weight type movements might be a better idea for your overall size. So again, higher volume with things like chin-ups, dips, glute ham raises, things like that. And then everything else needs to have an explosive component. That's how I would train someone who wanted to get really good at martial arts, but still wants to get bigger. That's what I would recommend. Definitely not the novice 5x5. All right, next question. Can Pendlay Rows add muscle and strength to your posterior chain? I ask this because there is no eccentric part of the movement, and of course the eccentric part of a repetition is what tears muscle fibers open and consequently forces them to grow back even bigger. All right, a couple points need to be addressed here. Number one, eccentric reps are not essential for size. This has been proven repeatedly. They're a very useful tool for gaining muscle mass. They're one of the tools in your toolbox. You can get big, you can get very big without ever doing a single eccentric rep in your life. So that myth needs to be thrown out. They're just a very useful tool for doing so, while if you want to reduce total training volume and still get maximum size, eccentric reps become a helpful tool. They absolutely are not required for maximum size, though. They just let you do so with less training volume. The other thing that needs to go away, this whole idea that you're tearing muscle fibers or tearing them open, that is not true. That is a garbage myth that needs to go away. What you see with some eccentric training is you see micro tearing in the connective tissue around bundles of muscle fibers. You're not actually tearing the muscle fibers themselves. When you tear muscle fibers in any significant amount, you will need to go to the emergency room. It doesn't mean because you've torn a muscle off the bone, but that tearing, you will see it in your urine. This is a medical condition. In fact, I need to address this more in the future so people understand it, because I'm going to mispronounce it wrong. It's called like rhombidosis or something. I'm saying it wrong. I'll have to look it up later. That is actually, you'll know that you have it because your urine will turn dark brown after your workout. An hour or two after you train, your urine will be dark brown or bloody. You'll be either peeing blood or rust-colored called urine. And if that happens as a result of training, that's what happens when you actually tear muscle fibers, and you need to go to the emergency room because you could die from this. This is actually a dangerous condition. So no, you're not tearing muscle fibers through your training, and if you are, it's actually a problem and it's harmful to your health, and it could kill you or injure you permanently. So you need to go to a medical doctor if you see signs that you have actually started tearing muscle fibers. And this happens a lot in some sort of sports. Some athletes experience this, and some people in CrossFit, they experience this also as a result of too much training load or working out in one session. So this is not desirable. You're not tearing muscle fibers when you train in the gym with any sort of reasonable program. All right, next question. Are bench dips bad for your shoulders? For those who don't have a dip bar, also are upright rows no higher than the nipple height bad for the shoulders the way common upright rows are? Honestly, it really depends on the bench dips. It's going to depend on the person and whether you feel a strain in your shoulders or not, and how deep you're going. If you don't have access to dip bars and you have access to competent spotters to put plates on your lap, the bench dips can be viable. But again, it's all about hand positioning. You need to keep your hands really, really narrow if you're going to do them, which means all the way pretty much touching your side so that you can get almost like a close grip bench. So you want them no more than shoulder width. And that way you can keep them tucked. So you need to be able to keep the elbows back and not flare out if you want to protect your shoulders on this exercise. You need to have a competent spotter or two who can grab plates and stack plates on your lap and take them back off if you want to do this safely without risk of injury. And is it a viable exercise? Yes, absolutely. It's just difficult to get it loaded up enough for it to be an effective exercise. And like with any other pressing movement for the chest or the shoulders, particularly other chest movements, you need to be able to keep those elbows tucked. And by keeping your elbows all the way back and your hands in narrow, fingers forward, and the palms fairly narrow behind you, you can achieve that. But it is important that you do that if you want to protect your shoulders on a bench dip. And again, competent spotters are going to be a requirement on this exercise. So it does require a little more finesse, but it can be done safely. Now, as far as the upright rows, yeah, we do know the higher you go on an upright row, the more detrimental it can become to the shoulder. But the thing that you need to consider with that is you're always taking a risk on like the glenoids in your shoulder joints by doing that, because you lose the ability to put your hands into a better position when doing upright rows like that. The best way to do it, if you really want to minimize the risk to your shoulder and you're never going to take it away completely, is going to be to maybe use a cambered bar so that you can get your thumbs turned forward a little more using a cambered bar. Because the thing is, having that pinky up, like a lot of bodybuilders recommend, like pouring out a teacup is the way they describe it, like pouring a kettle or a teacup. That's actually what damages your shoulders on things like side laterals. And if you look at your hand position on upright rows, it almost forces that. So the only way you might be able to offset that a bit is to, again, use a cambered bar so that you can get the thumb forward a little bit. And you need to keep the actual range of motion shorter, which means no higher than nipple line. But the thing to keep in mind there, if you choose to use an upright row at all, you need to look at those factors. You should probably use a fairly wide grip where you can keep the thumb out further with a cambered bar, watch the hand position, and if you feel any pain in your shoulders at all, your shoulder joint, you should probably discontinue the exercise anyway. I don't necessarily recommend the upright row due to the risks, but if you're going to insist on doing it, those are the rules I would implement. All right, next question and last question of the week. When trying to lose weight, should you focus on your weekly average or pay more attention to your best lows? All right, good question. I guess it depends on, are you trying to feel good and feel productive about your weight loss, or are you trying to actually get an accurate measurement of maybe tissue lost and what's going to stay lost when you return back to maintenance? Well, if you're trying to feel good and just feel like you're making progress for motivation, look at the weekly lows. And some people need that. That actually is what they need to feel like they're motivated. And you can track both if you want, but what I would keep up with if you want to actual tissue loss, rather than shifts in water weight, you should probably keep up with your weekly highs or weekly average, meaning the highest that you weighed each week is going to determine kind of how much tissue you've lost. And the reason for that is that you always lose water weight initially when you go on a cut. Any caloric deficit is going to cause some water weight loss. but your weekly highs are going to indicate a closer amount of fluid balance to where you started. So therefore that's going to give you a little more accurate representation of actual tissue weight lost for when you go back in a calorie surplus, because usually you were in a calorie surplus when you started. Whereas, and if you want to know more at maintenance, again, your overall averages for the week might give you a better idea. So again, this depends on people who are doing a more slow, careful weight loss protocol. If you're doing fairly rapid weight loss, or you're doing something like a ketogenic diet, you're always going to be down a little lower on water weight no matter what. But people who are doing a more balanced diet approach, who are losing weight slowly, I would say that the weekly average is going to give you a better idea for when you're at maintenance calories. The weekly high is going to give you a better idea of what your body weight's going to be at when you return kind of to a small calorie surplus. The weekly average will give you at maintenance, and the weekly low is again just tracking net loss, including water at your lowest, which can be just good motivation. So really it depends on what you're trying to accurately measure. But at the end of the day, if the scale is going down on any of those, then you know you're at least losing body fat. So again, it depends on what you really want to measure when you're trying to decide which one of those you want to keep up with. And it's not a bad idea to keep up with all of them, just in general, just understand what each of them actually means. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.